question about encryption, Neil. You mentioned encryption as one of the things that, I guess, I'm assuming not having things encrypted led to some issues, right? So
yes, absolutely.
Is that, like, whenever I think about encryption, typically, software-based encryption, you turn on, it's sort of like, it's good if you don't have access to the application, right? It's sort of like if you're coming in from the outside and you try to go attack the data, it's encrypted, okay, then it worked. But if you go in through the application, the encryption doesn't really work because you have access to the, you've sort of hacked in through that way or something. Is
That's
there,
right.
I was curious, like, what you found looking at that. What kinds of encryption does work? Are there some that work better than others as far as how it's set up?
Sure, happy to talk about encryption. So by the way, you're exactly right. If you can take over somebody's account, say through phishing or another form of account takeover, and you have that person's credentials and they have access to the data, the application, the operating system, everything will happily decrypt all of the data and give it to you. And there's been a bunch of breaches like the Anthem breach and whatnot, where database administrator credentials were stolen and the systems happily decrypted all the data for the attackers. So one of the things that I'll mention at a macro level is when we looked at the 9,000 reported breaches, the categorization that, say, privacyrights.org gave, these breaches, if you look at those, phishing and malware seemed like it might be the biggest issue, but there were actually more smaller breaches that happen due to unencrypted data than even phishing or malware. So if you take into account the fact that there's many portable devices that have been lost or stolen, and sometimes there's just media, papers or hard disks where the hard disks got lost or stolen along the way, the number of breaches that happen due to the fact that data was simply not encrypted is actually more than all of the attackers' hacks, at least in the 15, 16 year period that we looked at. So I would encourage CISOs and CTOs and CIOs to just turn on disk level encryption as a very basic thing, whether it be File Vault on Macs, BitLocker on Windows, or just have mobile device management that has people put pins on all their phones. All of that will encrypt the data at a storage layer so that when these things get lost, there is no reportable breach. I will also say, though, that typically, if you look at cloud environments, the storage layer encryption, what it protects against is people stealing disks out of data centers, which happens, but doesn't happen as often as some other causes of breach. And so for that, you do need to encrypt at the application layer. And from a technical perspective, you should have that application layer encryption done and used by a service account that is not touched by humans. If you want to be as unbreachable as possible. So that's a little bit about encryption.
Yeah, cool. No, thank you for that, Neil. Yeah.
I think there was a story a few years ago where these big multifunction copiers, where all these copiers, they have hard drives, and basically in the hard drives there was thousands, tens of thousands of all the documents, because it was just like a temporary file and unencrypted, and you could get these copiers basically for free and see all kinds of information about.
It's like basically scanned data, right?
It's all the scanned data. Like you could just, and for years and years and years of information that could just be gleaned from the hard drives on those copiers that were being thrown away.
That is a great story. In fact, I think that beyond encryption, the other important thing to do is in security configuration for any such devices, it's better to just not store it, right? If there's a configuration setting where you could just tell the copier, don't store, don't archive all the scans, then if they aren't stored, then they can't be lost or stolen or breached. So there's an important concept of data minimization. Don't store it and you can't get breached.
That sounds like my vet with they won't store my credit card, and every time I have to give it to them, they go, we don't want to store it. And I go, it'd be so nice if you did, but I understand. Their life would be hell probably storing credit cards.
Who knows?
Before they
Maybe in 10 or 20 years, when there's more seatbelts, the equivalent of seatbelts deployed out there, then they can be stored, and we can get the convenience and the
Well, that-
security.
yeah.
But we're just not there right now.
That'll be
Yeah.
after Paul and I do the seatbelt automation venture.
Yeah.